Hello, welcome back. So we've covered up till now. We spent about a week on Marx. We spent quite some time on Durkheim, Weber. We've also looked at Du Bois and Gilman, and largely, at least these three, Marx, Weber, and Durkheim, are regarded as the classical social theorists. And what I want to do today is a short reflective tutorial, you can say, like something that where we go back and see, we put them in conversation with each other and see how each one of them looks at what could be called as a very similar or the same social reality, and yet because they all had very different points of departure, they came to very different or perhaps overlapping conclusions or interpretations, as you might call it. So here today we are going to be thinking together. That's the idea. Like, I want you to be thinking along with me as I raise questions, as I make comparisons, or even as I make some statements. You don't have to take everything that I say for what it is, because especially what I'm talking about today is trying to put these different scholars in conversation with each other, and there could be many ways of doing so, right? So firstly, looking at least Marx, Weber, and Durkheim, and I would say even Du Bois and Gilman, largely they would, within the various domains or various kinds of sociologists, they would usually be regarded as structural theorists. They are all looking at the underlying structure beneath society or social relations, and they are all looking at that particular time period which Karl Polanyi has referred to as the Great Transformation. It's a time of intense industrialization, the rise of capitalism, also urbanization and colonialism, imperialism. So that's the time period that they are responding to. Yet they each kind of come to it from a very different lens or a very different point of departure, right? I also laid out the context, who are the philosophers and thinkers that shape their thought. We know that Marx is writing from Germany and England, Weber is writing from Germany, and Durkheim from France. And so how the historical and political scenarios, economic scenarios, the context that they are writing from is shaping what they are seeing and how they are analyzing that particular social situation. One thing though runs common, I would say, in many of their thoughts, and that is the influence of Darwin, right? We see that each one of them, Marx, as he talks about the shifting modes of production, Weber, as he speaks about how an idea gets shaped and then how society moves forward with throwing part of that idea out but keeping the spirit in his Protestant ethic, the different forms of authority or legitimation. Similarly, Durkheim, each one of them can be seen in some ways as looking at social evolution. So the evolution idea, one could say, comes to them from reading Darwin. Now, let's spend a few minutes looking individually at them, and then at some points I will also start to make connections, right? But you also, I'm sure, as I speak, you are also thinking your thoughts, and they also will start to come together in a particular way. So for Marx, who is looking at social relations under capitalism, society is driven by, it's what is central is production for Marx. And he talks about how labor is essential, is an essential human activity, and how the way labor is organized, or how the modes of production under which labor is organized, has a role to play on the kind of social relations that are possible. For him, inequality or exploitation, to use his language, is not something that can be overcome within the capitalist system, because it is inherent in the system. It is on which the system rests. Exploitation is what produces surplus value. That is what he shows in his analysis, right? He also talks about how this particular mode of production, that is capitalism, has resulted in alienation in various forms, from the products of one's labor, from oneself, from the species being, and so on. So Marx is very much centered on the economic relations, as he's taking that as central to the social relations, and how they shape society, and the kind of social formations that become possible under capitalism. Now, the same society, Weber looks at it, and Weber sees I kind of forgot to mention one thing with Marx. For Marx, let's say if you look at religion, then religion is, or any ideas, Marx is inverting Hegel here in his dialectics. Remember, we spoke about that. So for Marx, ideology or religion or any other ideas are not what structure society, but they are in fact products of one's class relation. So the base is the economic structure, whereas the superstructure is religion would fit in there. Weber, not very directly so, but in some ways kind of looks at the same thing from the other direction. So he's looking at religion. He looks in his book, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. He looks at the sensibilities, the ethics, the discipline, the morality that Protestantism brings in, and how it produces the kind of individual that is so essential to the development of capitalism. So for him, in fact, it is not capitalism that gives a certain color to religion, but religion, not in a deterministic sense, but he uses the word elective affinity. So Protestantism has an elective affinity with capitalism. His lens itself is very different from Marx. On the other hand, he is also looking at how society, how authority is legitimated in society. What are the different forms through which this legitimation or authority occurs? So he spoke about legal rational authority, or charismatic authority, or traditional authority. When he's speaking about the legal rational authority, he's also talking about rising bureaucracy. He's one of the theorists who has a very important definition of the state as something, as an entity that has the monopoly over the use of force within its territory. So he defines state in a particular way. Then comes Durkheim. Durkheim is again looking at the great transformation, that time period, but his question, the question that guides him, is that he's also looking at the increasing industrialization, urbanization, the different forces that are gathering together in the same space, and so a very heterogeneous society coming together, and the increasing division of labor in relation to that. So contrary to what one might imagine is that society would fall apart with this increasing division of labor, he in fact argues that the division of labor is the glue that holds society together. So division of labor makes people interdependent on each other, and that holds society together. He also, well, not quite similar, but in a way, when Marx is talking about alienation, or Weber talks about disenchantment, or Weber also speaks about how, while Protestantism provided the mindset and the discipline or the morals or the ethics for capitalism that were essential for capitalism, or that was supportive of capitalism, that acted as a catalyst, the way capitalism is going now, with increased bureaucratization, increased greed, he says we have thrown away the cloak, and what now emerges is the iron cage that kind of traps us in the paradigm of capitalism. Durkheim also sees these often disturbing elements or aspects in the way, even if there is solidarity, there are moments of such disruption, or there are moments of disease, of when things start to fall apart, and he calls them anomie. And for him, anomie is when norms start to break down, when what we take for granted is no longer there. There isn't a solid ground for us to stand on. So now I want you to think about some of these ideas, and I want you to think about how these three scholars, for example, where are their overlaps, and where do they absolutely contradict each other, or do they even contradict each other, or are they just speaking different languages but talking about the same thing? Is it the elephant story that we've all heard as children, of one is looking at the tusk and the other is looking at the tail of the elephant, and one of them is touching the ear and speaking about the ear? So are they just looking at different parts of the same being, or is it that like I said, they are just using different lenses but ultimately describing or analyzing the same thing? Well, then I also brought in Du Bois and Gilbin. Du Bois gives a whole, a more, I would say, a more encompassing analysis of the same time period by bringing in race, and by looking at exploitation within the factory, to linking that to exploitation and expropriation in the colonies. So he really kind of does a broad sweep by bringing in the concept of the color line and how that shapes the global division of labor. Then Gilman comes in and goes from the globe into the household. So they change scales here, and Gilman talks about the economic dependence of women on men's paid labor, and how women's unpaid labor actually creates a structure for her exploitation. So are they also then coming in and looking at the same elephant and looking at different things? How is social reality to be explained? So it's so unlike science, for example, and I mentioned earlier on in when I was speaking in one of my lectures, I think that I've largely been teaching this course to science students, and in science usually, I mean, at least that's my outsider's view, your findings and your results have to be verifiable, and they're verifiable if the same results are obtained in a different laboratory and have been tried multiple times. Well, in the social sciences we are rigorous, but even with the rigor, the kind of lens or your analytical framework, the categories you choose, the relationships you focus on have a huge impact on the kind of analysis that emerges. That is why Weber reminds us it's an interpretive science. So how would you, let's say, take the time period of the Great Transformation, and what would be your categories of analysis? How would you now in hindsight, I mean, they were right in the middle of it, right? They were in the middle of all of these transformations. You have the advantage of looking back at that period in history. And you also, I'm imagining, since this is an NPTEL course, most of you are from India, you also have the advantage of looking at what is happening in Western Europe, in the United States, from the global south. How do you read it? How do you interpret it? What is your critique of, let's say, Marx's notion of exploitation, and how does that play in? Is it similar to what Du Bois said in terms of connecting that exploitation to what is going on in the colonies? Looking at increasing women in the workforce, how do you now read Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and how do you see her use of the kind of structural inequality that she's speaking about? How do you see Weber's role in explaining capitalism from the perspective of religion, right? How does that appear to you? And then how do you read them together? I just want, there is no fixed agenda for today's class, but I do want to leave you with these thoughts. I want you to be able to articulate, for example, how alienation, disenchantment, anomie, all of these ideas given by different scholars intersect or don't. Are they running in parallel lines? Are they just speaking in different planes and levels? How does exploitation connect to domination? How does exploitation connect to legitimacy and authority? How does means of ownership especially connect to authority and legitimation? So these are some of the things that I will leave you with, and with that I hope you will spend some time reflecting on this vast oeuvre of work from the classical sociologists as we move on to more contemporary scholars. Thank you.